To recap a little bit, last we seen Eragon, he was traveling into the forest with his, um, I'll say good friend. Why not? The storyteller Brahm, who apparently is another dragon rider that has a lot to teach Eragon, it would seem. So, Eragon's pretty excited about that. I know I am. And he also gave Eragon a new sword. He's got a red sword now. And he was saying that usually a dragon rider would have a sword the color of their dragon. But since they don't have somebody to make Eragon his own blue sword, the red sword's gonna have to do. Alright. When Eragon's eyes opened, the memory of Garrow's death crashed down on him. He pulled the blankets over his head and cried quietly under their warm darkness. It felt good just to lie there, to hide from the world outside. Eventually the tears stopped. He cursed Brahm. Then he reluctantly wiped his cheeks and got up. Brahm was making breakfast. "Good morning," he said it. Eragon grunted in reply. He jammed his cold fingers in his armpits and crouched by the fire until the food was ready. They ate quickly, trying to consume the food before it lost its warmth. When they finished, Eragon washed his bowl with snow, then spread the stolen leather on the ground. Washed it with snow? That's interesting. "What are you going to do with that?" asked Brahm. "We can't carry it with us." "I'm going to make a saddle for Saphira." Said Brahm, moving forward. "Well, dragons used to have two kinds of saddles. The first was hard and molded like a horse's saddle, but those take time and tools to make, neither of which we have. The other was thin and lightly padded. Nothing more than an extra layer between the rider and the dragon. Those saddles were used whenever speed and flexibility were important." Makes sense? "Do you know what they looked like?" "Better. I can make one." "Then please do," said Eragon, standing aside. "Very well, but pay attention. Someday you may have to do this yourself." With Saphira's permission, Brahm measured her neck and chest. You always ask a woman's permission before you measure her chest. Even if they're a dragon woman. In fact, more so if they're a dragon woman. Then he cut 5 bands out of the leather and outlined a dozen or so shapes on the hides. Once the pieces had been sliced out, he cut what remained of the hides into long cords. Brahm used the cords to sew everything together, but for each stitch, 2 holes had to be bored through the leather. Eragon helped with that. Intricate knots were rigged in place with buckles, and every strap was made extra long, so the saddle would still fit Saphira in the coming months, because she's growing ridiculously fast. The main part of the saddle was assembled from 3 identical sections sewn together with padding between them. Attached to the front was a thick loop that would fit snugly around one of Saphira's neck spikes, while wide bands sewn on either side would wrap around her belly and tie underneath. Taking the place of stirrups were a series of loops running down both bands, tightened. They would hold Eragon's leg in place. Hey Shmoka, the music is perfect background. I'm glad you like it. Yeah, I thought the music would be pretty good. And also the sunrise over Italy. Nice. While Brahm worked, Eragon repaired his pack and organized their supplies. The day was spent by the time their tasks were completed. Wary from his labor, Brahm put the saddle on Saphira and checked to see if the straps fit. He made a few small adjustments, then took it off, satisfied. "You did a good job," Eragon acknowledged grudgingly. Brahm inclined his head. "One tries his best. It should serve you well. The leather's sturdy enough." "Are you going to try it out?" asked Saphira. "Maybe tomorrow," said Eragon, storing the saddle with his blankets. It's too late now. In truth, he was not eager to fly again, not after the disastrous outcome of his last attempt. Dinner was made quickly. It tasted good, even though it was simple. While they ate, Brahm looked over the fire at Eragon and asked, "Will we leave tomorrow?" "There isn't any reason to stay." "I suppose not." He shifted. "Eragon, I must apologize about how events have turned out. I never wished for this to happen. Your family did not deserve such a tragedy. If there were anything I could do to reverse it, I would. This is a terrible situation for all of us." Eragon sat in silence, avoiding Brahm's gaze. Then Brahm said, "We're going to need horses. Maybe you do, but I have Saphira." Brahm shook his head. "There isn't a horse alive that can outrun a flying dragon, and Saphira is too young to carry us both. Besides, it'll be safer if we stay together, and riding is faster than walking." "But that'll make it hard to catch the Razak," protested Eragon. "On Saphira, I could probably find them within a day or two. On horses, it'll take much longer, even if it's possible to overtake the lead on the ground." Brahm said slowly, "That's a chance you'll have to take, if I'm to accompany you." "Hey, what's up, Best? Your phone died, but you're back? No worries. We're officially reading, though. Fair warning. Work at your own discretion. There may be spoilers." They've already mentioned something pretty big that happened in the last couple of chapters. It's probably going to get mentioned a few times. So, keep that in mind. But if you don't mind, I love having you, buddy. You know that. Where were we? Eragon thought it over. "All right," he grumbled. "We'll get horses, but you have to buy them. I don't have any money, and I don't want to steal again. It's wrong." "That depends on your point of view," corrected Brahm, with a slight smile. "Before you set on this venture, remember that your enemies, the Razak, are the king's servants. They will be protected wherever they go. Laws do not stop them. In cities, they'll have abundant resources and willing servants. Keep in mind that nothing is more important to Galbatorix than recruiting or killing you. Though word of your existence probably hasn't reached him yet, the longer you evade the Razak, the more desperate he'll become. He'll know that every day you'll be growing stronger, that each passing moment will give you another chance to join his enemies. You must be very careful, as you may easily turn from the hunter into the hunted." Eragon was subdued by the strong words. Pensive, he rolled a twig between his fingers. "Enough talk," said Brahm. "It's late, and my bones ache. We can say more tomorrow." Eragon nodded and banked the fire. "Fair enough, Brahm." He's like, "I'm talking to myself. Good night, Eragon." Theron's Ford. I'm hoping that's a city. Might be a person. Dawn was gray and overcast, with a cutting wind. The forest was quiet. After a light breakfast, Brahm and Eragon doused the fire and shouldered their packs, preparing to leave. Eragon hung his bow and quiver on the side of his pack, where he could easily reach them. Saphira wore the saddle. She would have to carry it until they got horses. Eragon carefully tied Zarok onto her back, too, as he did not want the extra weight. Zarok, if you did not know, is the name of his sword. Yes, swords have names in this book. If you get a magical sword, you name it. It's only right. Besides, in his hands, a sword would be no better than a club. Jeez, confidence much? Eragon had felt safe inside the bramble, but outside, weariness crept into his movements. Saphira took off and circled overhead. The trees thinned as they returned to the farm. I will see this place again, Eragon insisted to himself, looking at the ruined buildings. This cannot, will not, be a permanent exile. Someday when it's safe, I'll return. Throwing back his shoulders, he faced south in the strange, barbaric lands that lay there. In The Hobbit and... what does that say? In Lord of the Rings, swords have names. I getcha. Fair enough. It's what you gotta do, right? If you want to be a badass, you need to name your weapon. As they walked, Saphira veered west toward the mountains and out of sight. Eragon felt uncomfortable as he watched her go. Even now, with no one around, they could not spend their days together. She had to stay hidden in case they met a fellow stranger. The Razok's footprints were faint on the eroding snow, but Eragon was unconcerned. It was unlikely they had forsaken the road, which was the easiest way out of the valley for the wilderness. Once outside the valley, however, the road divided in several places. It would be hard to ascertain which branch the Razok had taken. They traveled in silence, concentrating on speed. Eragon's legs continued to bleed where the scabs had cracked. Yeah, his legs lost all their skin from riding Saphira. To take his mind off the discomfort, he asked, "So what exactly can dragons do? You said that you knew something of their ability." Brahm laughed, his sapphire ring flashing in the air as he gestured. "Unfortunately, it's a pitiful amount compared to what I would like to know. Your question is one people have been trying to answer for centuries. So understand that's what I tell you is by its very nature incomplete. Dragons have always been mysterious, though maybe not on purpose. Before I can truly answer your question, you need a basic education on the subject of dragons. It's hopelessly confusing to start in the middle of such a complex topic without understanding the foundation on which it stands." Brahm about to lay down some facts. "I'll begin with the life cycle of a dragon. If that doesn't wear you out, we can continue to something else." Brahm explained how dragons mate. He's like, you see, when a mommy dragon and a daddy dragon love each other very much, they find a cave together and they lay an egg, and that's where you came from. But if you're a dragon rider, that's not where you came from at all. That's where your dragon came from. Yeah, alright. When a dragon lays an egg, the infant inside is ready to hatch. But it waits, sometimes for years, for the right circumstance. When dragons live in the wild, those circumstances are dictated by the availability of food. Oh, that's it. That's literally it. They're like, is there food ready for me? Then I'm staying in my fucking egg. And I've never related to something so much. That's me in my bed. When dragons live... Oh, okay, I read that. However, once they formed an alliance with the elves, a certain number of their eggs, usually no more than 1 or 2, were given to the riders each year. These eggs, or rather, the infants inside, wouldn't hatch until the person destined to be its rider came into their presence. Though how they sensed that is not known. People used to line up to touch the eggs, hoping that one of them might be picked. Do you mean that Saphira might not have hatched from me? Asked Eragon. Quite possibly if she hadn't liked you. He felt honored that out of all the people in Allegasia, she had chosen him. He wondered how long she'd been waiting, then shuddered at the thought of being crammed inside an egg, surrounded by darkness. Brahm continued his lecture. He explained what and when dragons ate. A fully grown sedentary dragon could go for months without food, but in mating season they had to eat every week. I mean, every week, that's actually pretty lit. Imagine only eating once a week. I'm down. No, I'm not down, but too bad, huh? I would still eat every day. Some plants could heal their sicknesses, while others would make them ill. There are various ways to care for their claws and clean their scales. He explained the techniques to use when attacking from a dragon, and what to do if you are fighting one, whether on foot, horseback, or with another dragon. Their bellies were armored, their armpits were not. Oh, okay. Eragon constantly interrupted to ask questions, and Brahm seemed pleased by the inquiries. Hours passed unheeded as they talked. When evening came, they were near Theron's Ford. I knew it was a city, just by the name. As the sky darkened, and they searched for a place to camp, Eragon asked, "Who was the rider that owned Zarok?" Ooh, he's getting personal now. "A mighty warrior," said Brahm, "who was much feared in his time, and held great power." There's an artery in your armpit? Oh, really? Like, that's actually like a strat? Interesting. I figured it would make sense because, like, if you, like, impale somebody through their armpits, right? Like, you figure you could get the heart if you get the right side very easily. And even from the other side, it's gonna go through their chest horizontally. That could hit their heart, and you're gonna hit a lot of important stuff on the way. So yeah, seems legit. Yeah, so a mighty warrior who was much feared in his time. What was his name? I'll not say. Eragon protested, but Brahm was firm. "I don't want to keep you ignorant, far from it, but certain knowledge would prove dangerous and distracting." That's why in video games some stealth attacks they stab in the armpit. Ah, fair enough. "There isn't any reason for me to trouble you with such things until you have the time and the power to deal with them. I only wish to protect you from those who would use you for evil." Eragon glared at him. "You know what? I think you just enjoy speaking in riddles." "I've half a mind to leave you so I don't have to be bothered with them. If you're going to say something, then say it instead of dancing around with vague phrases." "Peace. All will be told in time." There you go. He just throws a riddle at him. "You don't like my riddles, eh? Here's another one." Brahm said gently. Eragon grunted, unconvinced. They found a comfortable place to spend the night and set up camp. Saphira joined them as dinner was being set on the fire. "Did you have to hunt for food?" she asked Eragon. She snorted with amusement. "If the two of you were any slower, I would have time to fly across the sky and back without falling behind." Sheesh. I mean, I'm sure the horses are trying. "You don't have to be insulting. Besides, we'll go faster once we have horses." She let out a puff of smoke. "Maybe. But will it be enough to catch the Razak? They have a lead of several days and many leagues, and I'm afraid they may suspect we're following them. Why else would they have destroyed the farm in such a spectacular manner? Unless they wish to provoke you into chasing them." That's a good point. "I don't know," said Eragon, disturbed. Saphira curled up beside him, and he leaned against her belly, welcoming the warmth. Brahm sat on the other side of the fire, whittling two long sticks. He suddenly threw one at Eragon, who grabbed it out of reflex as it whirled over the crackling flames. Defend yourself! barked Brom, standing. Eragon looked at the stick in his hand and saw that it was shaped in the crude likeness of a sword. Brom wanted to fight him? What chance did the old man stand? If he wants to play this game, so be it. But if he thinks he can beat me, he's in for a surprise. He rose as Brom circled the fire. They faced each other for a moment. Then Brom charged, swinging his stick. Eragon tried to block the attack, but was too slow. He yelped as Brom struck him on the ribs and stumbled backwards. On the ribs? Jeez. Brom is merciless. It's like, you called me an old man one too many times. And seriously, getting hit in the ribs hurts. Going right for the bones, unbelievable. The solid smack of wood striking wood resounded through the camp. Improvisation! Good! Exclaimed Brom, eyes gleaming. His arm moved in a blur. It's getting all anime now, even though they're just fighting with sticks. And there was an explosion of pain on the side of Eragon's head. He collapsed like an empty sack, dazed. A splash of cold water roused him to alertness, and he sat back up, sputtering. His head was ringing. There was dried blood on his face. Brom stood over him with a pan of melted snow water. You didn't have to do that, said Eragon angrily, pushing himself up. He felt dizzy and unsteady. Brom arched an eyebrow. Oh? A real enemy wouldn't soften his blows, and neither will I. Should I pander to your incompetence? Will you do any better? I don't think so. He picked up the stick that Eragon had dropped and held it out. Now, defend yourself. Eragon stared blankly at the piece of wood, then shook his head. Forget it. I've had enough. He turned away and stumbled as he was whacked loudly across the back. He spun around, growling. Never turn your back to the enemy, snapped Brom, then tossed the stick at him and attacked. Eragon retreated around the fire beneath the onslaught. Pull your arms in. Keep your knees bent, shouted Brom. He continued to give instructions, then paused to show Eragon exactly how to execute a certain move. Do it again, but this time, slowly. They slid through the forms with exaggerated motions before returning to their furious battle. Eragon learned quickly, but no matter what he tried, he could not hold Brom off for more than a few blows. When they finished, Eragon flopped on his blankets and groaned. He was hurt everywhere. Brom had not been gentle with the stick. Saphira let out a long, coughing growl and curled her lip into a formidable row of teeth. What's wrong with you? He demanded irritably. Nothing, she replied. It's funny to see a hatchling like you get beaten by the older one. She made the sound again, and Eragon turned red as he realized that she was laughing. Trying to preserve some dignity, he rolled onto his side and fell asleep. He felt even worse the next day. Bruises covered his arms, and he was almost too sore to move. Brom looked up from the mush, it does say mush, he was serving, and grinned. Oh, okay. How do you feel? Eragon grunted and bolted down the breakfast. Once on the road, they traveled swiftly to reach Theranisford before noon. After a league, the road widened and they saw smoke in the distance. You'd better tell Saphira to fly ahead, and wait for us on the other side of Theranisford, said Brom. She has to be careful here, otherwise people are bound to notice her. Why don't you tell her yourself? Challenged Eragon. It's considered bad manners to interfere with another's dragon. You didn't have a problem with it in Carvahall. Brom's lips twitched with a smile. I did what I had to. Eragon eyed him darkly, then relayed the instructions. Saphira warned, be careful. The Empire's servants could be hiding everywhere. Or anywhere. Tomato. As the ruts in the wood, in the road deepened, Eragon noticed more footprints. Farms signaled their approach to Theransford. The village was larger than Carvajal, but it had been constructed haphazardly. The houses aligned in no particular order. What a mess, said Eragon. He could not see Dempton's mill. Balder and Albric have surely fetched Rowan by now, or Roran, his cousin. Either way, Eragon had no wish to face his cousin. Oh, well, guess I didn't need to remind you. It's ugly, if nothing else. The Enora River flowed between them and the town, spanned by a stout bridge. As they approached it, a greasy man stepped from behind a bush and barred their way. His shirt was short, and his dirty stomach spilled over a rope belt. Behind his cracked lips, his teeth looked like crumbling tombstones. You can stop right there. This is my bridge. Gotta pay to get over. How much? Asked Brom in a resigned voice. He pulled out a pouch, and the bridgekeeper brightened. 5 crowns, he said, pulling his lips into a broad smile. Eragon's temper flared at the exorbitant price, and he started to complain hotly, but Brom silenced him with a quick look. The coins were wordlessly handed over. The man put them into a sack hanging from his belt. Thank you much, he said in a mocking tone, and stood out of the way. As Brom stepped forward, he stumbled and caught the bridgekeeper's arm to support himself. Watch your step, snarled the grimy man, sliding away. Sorry, apologized Brom, and continued over the bridge with Eragon. Why didn't you haggle? He skinned you alive, exclaimed Eragon when they were out of earshot. He probably doesn't even own the bridge. We could have pushed right past him. Probably, agreed Eragon. Then why pay him? Because you can't argue with all of the fools in the world. It's either let them have their way, then trick them when they're not paying attention. Brom opened his hand and a pile of coins gleamed into the light. You stole those, exclaimed Eragon, incredulous. Brom pocketed the money with a wink. Anyone who gulls innocent travelers for a living ought to know better than to carry such a large sum on his person. Come, let us be off before our greedy friend realizes what happened. If you see any watchmen wandering around, tell me. He grabbed the shoulder of a young boy running between the houses and asked, Do you know where we can buy horses? The child stared at them with solemn eyes and then pointed to a large barn near the end of Theransfold. Thank you, said Brom, tossing him half a coin. Half a coin? I don't understand what that means. Like literally like half a coin, like half of a circle. Or like it's worth, like 50 cents basically. It's confusing. The barn's large double doors were open, revealing 2 long rows of stalls. The far wall was covered with saddles, harnesses, and other paraphernalia. A man with muscular arms stood at the end, brushing a white stallion. He raised a hand and beckoned for them to come over. As they approached, Brom said, That's a beautiful animal. Yes, indeed. His name's Snowfire. Mine's Habert. Haberth offered a rough palm and shook hands vigorously with Eragon and Brom. There was a polite pause as he waited for their names to return. A polite pause. Not awkward as fuck, where he's just like, doesn't even ask who they are, just stares at them, waiting. When they were not forthcoming, he asked, Can I help you? Brom nodded. We need 2 horses and a full set of tack for both. The horses have to be fast and tough. We'll be doing a lot of traveling. Herbert was thoughtful for a moment. I don't have many animals like that, and the ones I do aren't cheap. The stallion moved restlessly. He calmed it with a few strokes of his fingers. Price is no object. I'll take the best you have, said Brom. Harberth nodded and silently tied the stallion to a stall. He went to the wall and started pulling down saddles and other items. Soon he had 2 identical piles. Next he walked up the line of stalls and brought out two horses. One was a light bay. Bay, what a weird color. Makes me think blue. The other a rowan. Rowan? What the hell are these colors? The bay tugged against his rope. Maybe they're types of horses? I don't know. He's a little spirited, but with a firm hand you won't have any problems, said Haberth, handing the bay's rope to Brom. Brom let the horse smell his hand. It allowed him to rub its neck. We'll take him, he said, then eyed the roan. The other one, however, I'm not so sure of. There are some good legs on him. What will you take for Snowfire? Harborough looked fondly at the stallion. I'd rather not sell him. He's the finest I've ever bred. I'm hoping to sire a whole line from... If you were willing to part with him, how much would all of it cost me? Eragon tried to put his hand on the bay like Brom had, but it shied away. He automatically reached out with his mind to reassure the horse, stiffening with surprise as he touched the animal's conscience. One second. Alright, sorry about that. I had to sneeze. So Brom trying to haggle for this fancy horse, Snowfire. I mean, can you blame him? What an awesome name. I want Snowfire too. So, Eragon trying to get into the mind of the horse. The contact was not clear or sharp like it was with Saphira, but he could communicate with the bay to a limited degree. Tentatively, he made it understand that he was a friend. The horse calmed and looked at him with liquid brown eyes. Haberth used his fingers to add up the price of the purchase. 200 crowns, no less, he said with a smile. Clearly confident that no one would pay that much. Brom silently opened his pouch and counted out the money. Will this do? He asked. There was a long silence as Haberth glanced between Snowfire and the coins. This is literally like when you go to buy things from an NPC and they're like in a video game, and they're like, ah, that's the family heirloom. I'll sell it to you for 100 grand, and they're like, not expecting you to be that wealthy, and they're like, alright, 10, 20, 30, and they're like, wait, hang on, what? A sigh, then. He's yours, though I go against my heart. I'll treat him as if he had been sired by Gildentor, the greatest steed of legend. Your words gladden me, answered Haberth, bowing his head slightly. He helped them saddle the horses. When they were ready to leave, he said, Farewell, then. For the sake of Snowfire, I hope that misfortune does not befall you. Do not fear, I will guard him well, promised Brom as they departed. Here, he said, handing Snowfire's reins to Eragon. Go to the far side of Therinsford and wait there. Why? Asked Eragon, but Brom had already slipped away. Annoyed, he exited Therinsford with the two horses and stationed himself beside the road. To the south, he saw the hazy outline of Utgard, sitting out like a giant monolith at the end of the valley. Its peak pierced the clouds and rose out of sight, towering over the lesser mountains. One second again. I'm really not feeling so hot today. But I'm gonna at least get like 50 pages done. That's for sure. I figure I do this in 50s, we'll be done in like 5 or 6 months. That's not too bad. The dark, ominous look of the mountain made Eragon's scalp tingle. Brom returned shortly and gestured for Eragon to follow. They walked until Theron's ford was hidden by trees. Then Brom said, "The Razak definitely passed this way. Apparently they stopped here to pick up horses as we did. I was able to find a man who saw them. He described them with many shudders and said that they galloped out of Theron's ford like demons fleeing a holy man. They left quite an impression. Quite." Eragon patted the horses. "While we were in the barn, I touched the bay's mind by accident. I didn't know it was possible to do that." Brom frowned. "It's unusual for one as young as you to have the ability. Most riders have to train years before they're strong enough to contact anything other than their dragon." His face was thoughtful as he inspected Snowfire. Then he said, "Take everything from your pack, put it into the saddlebags, and tie the pack on top." Eragon did so while Brom mounted Snowfire. Eragon gazed doubtful at the bay. It was so much smaller than Saphira that for an absurd moment he wondered if it could even bear his weight. With a sigh, he awkwardly got into the saddle. He had only ridden horses bareback and never for any distance. "Is this going to do the same thing to my legs as Saphira?" he asked. "Well, how do they feel now?" "Not too bad, but I think any hard riding will open them up again." "We'll take it easy," promised Brom. He gave Eragon a few pointers, then he started at a gentle pace. Before long, the countryside began to change as cultivated fields yielded to wider land, or wilder land. Brambles and tangled weeds lined the road, along with huge rose bushes that clung to their clothes. Tall rocks slanted out of the ground, great witnesses to their presence. There was an unfriendly feel in the air. Above them, growing larger with every step, loomed Utgard, its craggy precipices deeply furrowed with snowy canyons. The black rock of the mountain absorbed the light like a sponge and dimmed the surrounding area. Between Utgard and the line of mountains that formed the east side of Palancar Valley was a deep cleft. It was the only practical way out of the valley. The road led toward it. The horses' hooves clacked sharply over gravel, and the road dwindled to a skinny trail as it skirtled to the base of Utgard. Eragon glanced up at the peak looming over them and was startled to see a steepled tower perched on it. The turret was crumbling and in disrepair, but there was still a stem sentinel over the valley. "What is that?" he asked. Brom did not look up, but said sadly and with bitterness, "An outpost of the riders. One that has lasted since their founding. That was where Vral took refuge, and where, through treachery, he was found and defeated by Galbatorix. When Vral fell, this area was tainted by Edosil, the Unconquerable. It was the name of this bastion, for the mountain is so steep, none may reach the top unless they can fly. After Vral's death, the commoners called it Utgard, but it has another name. Oh boy. Ristvakbane, the place of sorrow. It was known as such to the last riders before they were killed by the king." Eragon stared with awe. Here was a tangible remnant of the riders' glory, tarnished though it was by the relentless pull of time. It struck him just how old the riders were, a legacy of tradition and heroism that stretched back to antiquity had fallen upon him. They traveled for long hours around Utgard. It formed a solid wall to their right as they entered the breach that divided the mountain range. Eragon stood in his stirrups. He was impatient to see what lay outside Palancar, but but it was still too far away. For a while, they were in a sloped pass, winding over hills and gully, following the Enora River. Then, with the sun low behind their backs, they mounted a rise and saw over the trees. Eragon gasped. On either side were mountains, but below them stretched a huge plain that extended to the distant horizon and fused into the sky. The plain was a uniform tan, like the color of dead grass. He understood now why Brahm had insisted on horses. It would have taken them weeks or months to cover the vast distance on foot. Far above he saw Saphira circling, high enough to be mistaken for a bird. "We'll be waiting until tomorrow to make the descent," said Brahm. "It's going to take most of the day, so we should camp now." "How far across is the plain?" Eragon asked, still amazed. 2 or 3 days to over a fortnight, depending on which direction we go. Aside from the normal tribes that roam this section of the plains, it's almost as uninhabited as the Hatterack Desert. So we aren't going to find many villages. However, to the south, the plains are less arid and more heavily populated. As they unsaddled the horses, Brahm gestured at the bay. "You should name him." Eragon considered as he picketed the bay. "Well, I don't have anything as noble as Snowfire, but maybe this'll do." He put his hand on the bay and said, "I name you Kadak. It was my grandfather's name, so bear it well." I don't know if his grandfather would be proud to be the name of his horse, you know? I wouldn't exactly be like humbled by that. You know what? Whatever. Brahm insisted. Brahm nodded in approval, but Eragon felt slightly foolish. Yeah, fair enough. When Saphira landed, he asked, "How do the plains look?" "Dull. There's nothing but rabbits and scrub in every direction." After dinner, Brahm stood and barked, "Catch!" Eragon barely had time to raise his arm and grab the piece of wood before it hit him on the head. He groaned as he saw another makeshift sword. "Not again," he complained. Brahm just smiled and beckoned with one hand. Eragon reluctantly got to his feet. They whirled around in a flurry of smacking wood, and he backed away with a stinging arm. The training session was shorter than the first, but it was still long enough for Eragon to amass a new collection of bruises. When they finished sparring, he threw down his stick in disgust and stalked away from the fire to nurse his injuries. Thunder, roar, and lightning crackle. Interesting. The next morning, Eragon avoided bringing to mind any of the recent events. They were too painful for him to consider. Instead, he focused his energies on figuring out how to kill the Razak. "I'll do it with my bow," he decided, imagining how the cloaked figures would look with arrows stuck in them. He had difficulty standing up. His muscles cramped with the slightest movement, and one of his fingers was hot and swollen. When they were ready to leave, he mounted Kadak and said acidly, "If this keeps up, you're gonna batter me to pieces." "I wouldn't push you so hard if I didn't think you were strong enough." "For once, I wouldn't mind being thought less of," muttered Eragon. Kadak pranced nervously as Saphira approached. Saphira eyed the horse with something close to disgust and said, "There's nowhere to hide in the plains, so I'm not going to bother trying to stay out of sight. I'll just fly above you from now on." She took off, and they began the steep descent. In many places, the trail all but disappeared, leaving them to find their own way. At times, they had to dismount and lead the horses on foot, holding onto trees to keep from falling. The ground was scattered with loose rock. They stopped to rest when they reached the bottom near midday. The Enora River veered to their left and flowed northward. A biting wind scoured the land, whipping them unmercifully. The soil was parched, and dirt flew into their eyes. It unnerved Eragon how flat everything was. Oh, too flat here. More mountains for me to fall off, please. The plains were unbroken by hammocks or mounds. He had lived his entire life surrounded by mountains and hills. Without them, he felt exposed and vulnerable, like a mouse under an eagle's keen eye. The trail split in three once it reached the plains. The first branch turned north towards Siunin, one of the greatest northern cities. The second one led straight across the plains, and the last went south. It seems they've gone to Yazuak, said Brahm, with a perplexed air. Where is that? Due east, and 4 days away, if all goes well. It's a small village situated by the Ynorr River. He gestured at the Ynorr, which streamed away from them to the north. Our only supply of water is here. We'll have to replenish our water skins before attempting to cross the plains. There isn't another pool or stream between here and Yazuak. The excitement of the hunt began to rise within Eragon. In a few days, maybe less than a week, he would have his vengeance. He refused to think about what might happen afterward. They filled the water skins, watered the horses, and drank as much as they could from the river. Saphira joined them and took several gulps of water. Fortified, they turned eastward and started across the plains. Eragon decided that it would be the wind that drove him crazy first. Everything that made him miserable, his chapped lips, parched tongue, and burning eyes, stemmed from the wind. The ceaseless gusting followed them throughout the day. Evening only strengthened the wind instead of subduing it. Since there was no shelter, they were forced to camp in the open. Eragon found some bush, or some scrub brush, a short tough plant that thrived on harsh condition. He made a careful pile and tried to light it, but the woody stems only smoked and gave off a pungent smell. Why is he trying to light it and not Saphira? Alright, sorry about that. I keep losing my voice here. But yeah, he's over here trying to use matches, and he's got a dragon behind him. Frustrated, he tossed the tinderbox to Brahm. I can't make it burn, especially with this blasted wind. See if you can get it going, otherwise dinner will be cold. Brahm knelt by the brush and looked at it critically. He rearranged a couple of branches, then struck the tinderbox. There was smoke, but nothing else. Brahm scowled and tried again, but his luck was no better than Eragon's. Brizinger, he swore angrily, striking the flint again. Flames suddenly appeared, and he stepped back with a pleased expression. There we go. It must have been smoldering inside. They sparred with mock swords while the food cooked. Fatigue made it hard on both of them, so they kept the session short. After they had eaten, they lay next to Saphira and slept, grateful for her shelter. The same cold wind greeted them in the morning, sweeping over the dreadful flatness. Eragon's lips had cracked during the night. Every time he smiled or talked, beads of blood covered them. The day was a monotonous trek of endless plodding. On the third day, Eragon awoke well rested. That, coupled with the fact that the wind had stopped, put him in a cheery humor. His high spirits were dampened, however, when he saw the sky ahead of them was dark with thunderheads. Brahm looked at the clouds and grimaced. Normally I would go into a storm like that, but but we're in for a battering no matter what we do, so we might as well get some distance. As they entered its shadow, Eragon looked up. The thundercloud had an exotic structure, forming a natural cathedral with a massive arched roof. With some imagination, you could see pillars, windows soaring tiers, and snarling gargoyles. It was a wild beauty. As Eragon lowered his gaze, a giant ripple faced toward them through the grass, flattening it. It took him a second to realize that the wave was a tremendous blast of wind. Brahm saw it too, and they hunched their shoulders, preparing for the storm. The gale was almost upon them when Eragon had a horrible thought and twisted in his saddle, yelling both his voice and mind. Saphira! Land! Brahm's face grew pale. Overhead they saw her dive toward the ground. She's not going to make it. Saphira angled back the way they had come, to gain time. As they watched, the tempest's wrath struck them like a hammer blow. Eragon gasped for breath and clutched the saddle as a frenzied howling filled his ears. Kadak swayed and dug his hooves into the ground. Eragon squinted, searching for Saphira. He saw her land heavily and then crouch, clenching the ground with her talons. I mean, obviously she's gonna be fine. She's a dragon. Underestimating her big time. With a savage wrench, Eragon yanked Kadak around and galloped back up the trail, goading the horse with both heels and mine. Saphira, he shouted. Try to stay on the ground. I'm coming. He felt a grim acknowledgement from her. As they neared Saphira, Kadak balked, so Eragon leapt down and ran towards her. His bow banged against his head. A strong gust pushed him off balance and he flew forward, landing on his chest. He skidded, then got back up with a snarl, ignoring the deep scrapes in his skin. Saphira was only 3 yards away, but he could get no closer because of her flailing wings. She struggled to fold them against the overpowering gale. The spines of her back missed her head by inches. Saphira clawed at the ground, trying to stay down. Her wings began to lift again, but before they could flip her, Eragon threw himself at the left one. The wing crumbled in at the joints, and Saphira tucked it firmly against her body. Eragon vaulted over her back and tumbled onto the other wing. Without warning, it was blown upward, sending him sliding to the ground. He broke his fall with a roll, your classic video game strategy, then jumped up and grabbed the wing again. Saphira started to fold it, and he pushed with all of his strength. The wind battled them for a second, but with one last surge, they overcame it. Eragon leaned against Saphira, panting. Are you alright? He could feel her trembling. She took a moment to answer. I think so. She sounded shaken. Nothing's broken. I couldn't do anything. The wind wouldn't let me go. I was helpless. With a shudder, she fell silent. He looked at her, concerned. Don't worry, you're safe now. He spotted Kadak a ways off, standing with his back to the wind. The horse was just vibing. He was no problem with the storm. With his mind, Eragon instructed the horse to go to Brahm. He then got onto Saphira. She crept up the road, fighting the gale while he clung to her back and kept his head down. When they reached Brahm, he shouted of the storm. Is she hurt? Eragon shook his head and dismounted. Brahm pointed at a dark curtain of rain sweeping towards them, and rippling gray sheets. What else? Cried Eragon, pulling his clothes tighter. The stinging rain was cold as ice. Before long, they were drenched and shivering. Lightning lanced through the sky, flickering in and out of existence. Mile-high blue bolts streaked across the horizon, followed by peals of thunder that shook the ground. It was beautiful but dangerously so. Here and there, grass fires were ignited by strikes, only to be extinguished by the rain. The wild elements were slow to abate, but as the day passed, they wandered elsewhere. Once again, the sky was revealed, and the setting sun glowed with brilliance. As beams of light tinted the clouds with blazing colors, everything gained a sharp contrast. Ordinary things took on an unearthly beauty. Eragon felt as if he were sitting inside a painting. The rejuvenated earth smelled fresh, clearing their minds and raising their spirits. Saphira stretched, craning her neck, and roared happily. The horses skittered away from her, but Eragon and Brahm smiled at her exuberance. Before the light faded, they stopped for the night in a shallow depression. Too exhausted to spar, they went straight to sleep. I feel like I'm really struggling to read today. Not feeling the greatest, that definitely doesn't help. Checking how long the next chapter is. I feel like I can get one more in me. The next chapter is only 6 pages, and the one after that's 8. Okay, we'll do 2 more. I'm gonna try to do 2 more, I guess. Wait. I want to do 3 more. Shit. I wish I was feeling better. Hang on 1 second. Just give me a minute to recuperate. Alright. We might have to squeeze in 3 more chapters. Just for the sake of how I want to leave off. I'm like, I want like to have like a major event in every part, you know? Plus I only read like 20 pages, usually I read 50. Revelation at Yazuak. We gotta have a revelation before we go. Although they had managed to partially refill the water skins during the storm, they drank the last of the water that morning. I hope we're going in the right direction, said Eragon, crunching up the empty water bag. Because we'll be in trouble if we don't reach Yazuak today. Brahm did not seem too disturbed. I've traveled this way before. Yazuak will be in sight before dusk. Eragon laughed doubtfully. Perhaps you see something I don't. How can you know that when everything looks the same? Because I am guided not by the land, but by the stars and sun. They will not lead us astray. Come, let us be off. It is foolish to conjure up woe where none exists. Yazuak will be there. His words proved true. Saphira spotted the village first. But it was not until later in the day that the rest of them saw it as a dark blimp on the horizon. Yazuak was still very far away. It was only visible because of the plain's uniform flatness. As they rode closer, a dark, winding line appeared on either side of the town and disappeared in the distance. "The Ninor River," said Brahm, pointing at it. Eragon pulled Kadak to a stop. "Saphira will be seeing if she stays with us much longer. Should she hide while we go into Yazuak?" Brahm scratched his chin and looked at the town. "See that bend in the river? Have her wait there. It's far enough from Yazuak, so no one should find her. But close enough, as she won't be left behind. We'll go through the town, get what we need, and then meet her." "I don't like it," said Saphira, when Eragon had explained the plan. "This is irritating, having to hide all the time, like a criminal. You know what would happen if we were revealed." She grumbled but gave in and flew away low to the ground. They kept a swift pace in anticipation of the food and drink they would soon enjoy. An abnormal silence enveloped the village. By unspoken consent. Is that a thing? I don't think there's unspoken consent. They stopped before the first house. Eragon abruptly said, "There aren't any dogs barking." "No." "Doesn't mean anything, though." "No." Eragon paused. "Someone should have seen us by now." "Yes." Fucking Brahm. "Then why hasn't anyone come out?" Braun squinted at the sun. "Could be afraid." "Could be?" Eragon waited for a moment. "And if it's a trap?" "The Razak might be waiting for us." "We need provisions and water." "There's the Minor. Still need provisions." "True." Eragon looked around. "So we go in?" Brahm flicked his reins. "Yes, but not like fools. This is the main entrance to Yazuak. There is an ambush. It'll be here. No one will expect us to arrive from a different direction." "Around to the side, then," said Eragon. Brahm nodded and pulled out his sword, resting the bare blade across his saddle. Eragon strung his bow and nocked an arrow. They trotted quietly around the town and entered it cautiously. The streets were empty, except for a small fox that darted away. The houses were dark and foreboding, with shattered wood windows. Many of the doors swung on broken hinges. Eragon's palm tingled, but he resisted the urge to scratch it. As they rose into the center of the town, he gripped his bow tighter. "Gods above," he whispered. A mountain of bodies rose above them, the corpses stiff and grimacing. Their clothes were soaked in blood, and the churned ground was stained with it. Slaughtered men lay over the woman they had tried to protect, mothers still clasping children, and lovers who had tried to shield each other rested in death's embrace. Arrows stuck out of them all. Neither young nor old had been spared, but worst of all was the barbed spear that rose out of the peak of the pile, impaling the body of a baby. Jeesh. Tears blurred Eragon's vision, and he tried to look away, but the dead faces held his attention. He stared at their open eyes and wondered how life could have left them so easily. What does our existence mean when it can all end like this? A wave of hopelessness overwhelmed him. A crow dipped out of the sky like a black shadow and perched on the spear. It cocked its head and greedily scrutinized the infant. "Oh no you don't," snarled Eragon, as he pulled back the bowstring and released it. The puff of feathers, the crow fell backward, the arrow protruding from its chest. Eragon fit another arrow to the string, but nausea rose from his stomach, and he threw up over Kadak's side. Brahm patted him on the back. "Do you want to wait for me outside Yazuak?" "No, I'll stay." Who could have done? He could not even force out the words. Brahm bowed his head. "Those who love the pain and suffering of others." They wear many faces and go by many disguises, but there is only one name for them: evil. There is no understanding it. All we can do is pity and honor the victims. He dismounted Snowfire and walked around, inspecting the trampled ground carefully. The Razak passed this way, he said. But this wasn't their doing. This is Urgal work. The spears of their make. A company of their came through here. Perhaps as many as 100. It's odd. I know of only a few instances where they have gathered in such. He knelt and examined a footprint. Right, he hissed, tightly spurring Snowfire forward. There are still Urgals here. Eragon jammed his heel into Kadak. The horse jumped forward and raced after Snowfire. They dashed past the houses. And were almost to the edge of Yazuak when Eragon's palm tingled again. He saw a flicker of movement to the right. Then a giant fist smashed him out of the saddle. He flew back over Kadak and crashed into a wall. Gasping and stunned, he staggered upright, hugging his side. An Urgal stood over him, face set in a gross leer. The monster was tall, thick, and broader than a doorway, with gray skin and yellowish eyes. Muscles bulged on his arms and chest, which was covered by a too small breastplate. Did you just say his titties are too small? What the hell, Eragon? An iron cap rested over the pair of ram's horns, curling from his temples, and a round shield was bound to one arm. His powerful hand held a short, wicked sword. Behind him, Eragon saw Braum rein in Snowfire and start back, only to be stopped by the appearance of another Urgal. This one with an axe. "Run, you fool!" Braum cried to Eragon, cleaving at his enemy. The Urgal in front of Eragon roared and swung his sword mightily. Eragon jerked back with a cry as the weapon whistled past his cheek. He spun around and fled towards the center of Yazuak, heart pounding wildly. The Urgal pursued him, heavy boots thudding. Eragon sent out a desperate cry of help to Saphira, then forced himself to go faster. The Urgal rapidly gained ground despite Eragon's efforts. Large fangs separated in a soundless bellow. With the Urgal almost upon him, Eragon strung an arrow, spun to a stop, took aim, and released. The Urgal snapped up his arm and caught the quivering bolt on the shield. The monster collided with Eragon before he could shoot again, and they fell to the ground in a confused tangle. Eragon sprang to his feet and rushed back to Braum, who was trading fierce blows with his opponent from Snowfire's back. Where are the rest of the Urgals? Wondered Eragon frantically. Are these two the only one in Yazuak? There was a loud smack, and Snowfire reared, whining. Braum doubled over in his saddle, blood streaming down his arm. The Urgal beside him howled in triumph and raised his axe for the death blow. A deafening scream tore of Eragon as he charged the Urgal, head first. Eragon ducked under the two-handed blow and clawed the Urgal's side, leaving bloody furrows. The Urgal's face twisted with rage. He slashed again, but missed, as Eragon dived to the side and scrambled down an alley. Eragon concentrated on leading the Urgals away from Braum. He slipped into a narrow passage between two houses. Seeing it was a dead end, slid to a stop. He tried to back out, but the Urgals had already blocked the entrance. They advanced, cursing him. Eragon swung his head from side to side, looking for a way out, but there was none. As he faced the Urgals, images flashed in his mind. Dead villagers piled around the spear and an innocent baby who would never grow. At the thought of their fate... Oh, hang on, one sec. At the thought of their fate, a burning, fiery power gathered from every part of his body. It was more than a desire for justice. It was his entire being rebelled against the fact being rebelling against the fact of death, that he would cease to exist. The power grew stronger and stronger, till he felt ready to burst. He stood tall and straight, all fear gone. He raised his bow sight down the shaft as he had done hundreds of times, and aligned the arrowhead with his target. The energy inside him burned at an unbearable level. He had to release it, or it would consume him. A word suddenly leapt unbidden to his lips. He shot, yelling, "Brazinger!" The arrow hissed through the air, glowing with a crackling blue light. It struck the lead eagle on the forehead, and the air resounded with an explosion. A blue shock wave blasted out of the monster's head, killing the other eagle instantly. It reached Eragon before he had time to react, and it passed through him without harm, dissipating against the houses. Eragon stood panting, then looked at his icy palm. The Gedway Ignatia was glowing like white-hot metal, yet even as he watched, it faded to normal. He clenched his fist, then a wave of exhaustion washed over him. He felt strange and feeble, as if he had not eaten for days. His knees buckled, and he sagged against the wall. Whoa. That was quite the revelation indeed. I do want to finish at least 2 more chapters, but bear with me just another minute. Small break. Alright, and we're back. So, admonishments is our next chapter. Once a modicum of strength returned him, Eragon staggered out of the alley. Hey, what's up? It's your boy. Hope you're doing well. I'm actually not currently playing Assassin's Creed, but it's great to see you. Glad you could join the pastry party. I'm reading Eragon, my favorite book series. It's from Christopher Paolini. It's set in a sci-fi fantasy world, kind of like Lord of the Rings. If you do want to stick around for this, fair warning, we are like a pretty good length into this first book, like 100 pages. Basically right now, we're just traveling to, I can't even think of the name of the city. I'm reading the book right now. But, you just try to get to a particular town to take revenge on these Razak, for reasons I won't get into, just in case you do want to go back the YouTube and catch up. And he just discovered something a little special about the Dragon Riders that I also am not going to get into, but the book probably will in a second, because it literally just happened. But, yeah, Eragon just collapsed, and he's coming to now with admonishments. Hey, yeah, do you know this book series, or the book? A movie, maybe, perhaps? The movie wasn't as great, but I liked it. It introduced new people. It's also a great PS2 game. Yeah, I'll leave off with that. Okay, so he did not get far before Kadak strutted to his side. Good you weren't hurt, mumbled Eragon. He noticed, without particular caring, that his hands were shaking violently, and his movements were jerky. He felt detached, as if everything he saw was happening to someone else. Eragon also found Snowfire, nostrils flared and ears flat against his head, prancing by the corner of a house. Braum was still, slumped motionless in his saddle. Eragon reached out with his mind and soothed the horse. Once Snowfire was relaxed, Eragon went to Braum. I like how Eragon is more concerned with both of the horses than his mentor. It's like, that old man is fine. I know he is. There was a long, blood-soaked cut on the old man's right arm. The wound bled profusely, but it was neither deep nor wide. Still, Eragon knew it had to be bound before Braum lost too much blood. He stroked Snowfire for a moment, then slid Braum out of the saddle. The weight proved too much for him, and Braum dropped heavily to the ground. Eragon was shocked by his own weakness. A scream of rage filled his head. Saphira dived out of the sky and landed fiercely in front of him, keeping her wings half raised. She hissed angrily, eyes burning, her tail lashed, and Eragon winced as it snapped overhead. Are you hurt? She asked, rage boiling in her voice. No, he asked, as he laid Braum on his back. She growled and exclaimed, Where are the ones who did this? I will tear them apart. He warily pointed in the direction of the alley. It'll do no good. They're already dead. You killed them? Saphira sounded surprised. He nodded. Somehow. With a few terse words, he told her what happened while he searched his saddlebags for the rags in which Zarok had been wrapped. Zarok is his sword. Oh, did you spin the windmill? Hey, let's go. Oh, yeah. Usually it's in the background, but because of how the stream is set up, it's a little bit different. Here, I'll give you another one. Also, since you like Assassin's Creed, check it out. It's actually an Assassin set. The windmill is added from another set. But yeah. It's weird because it's Assassin's Creed 2 guards with Altair. Clearly not the highest budget Mega Block set in the world. Saphira said gravely, You have grown. Eragon grunted. He found a long rag and carefully rolled back Braum's sleeve. With a few strokes he cleaned the cut. I wish we were still in Palancar Valley, he said to Saphira. At least there I knew what plants were good for healing. Here, I don't have any idea what will help. We should leave, said Saphira. There may be more Urkels lurking about. Lurking about, I like it. Can you carry Braum? Your saddle will hold him in place, and you can protect him. Yes, but I'm not leaving you alone. Fine. Fly next to me. But let's get out of here. He tied the saddle onto Saphira, then put his arms around Braum and tried to lift him. But again, his diminished strength failed him. Saphira, help. She snaked her head past him and caught the back of Braum's robe between her teeth. Arching her neck, she lifted the old man off the ground, like a cat would a kitten, and deposited him onto her back. Then Eragon slipped Braum's legs through the saddle straps and tightened them. He looked up when the old man groaned and shifted. Braum blinked blearily, putting a hand to his head. He gazed at Eragon concerned. Did Saphira get here in time? Eragon shook his head. I'll explain later. Your arm is injured. I bandaged it as best as I could, but you need a place to rest. Yeah, said Brahm, gingerly, touching his arm. Do you know where my sword... Ah, I see you found it. Eragon finished tightening the straps. Saphira's going to take you and follow me by air. Are you sure you want me to ride her? Asked Brahm. I can ride Snowfire. Not with that arm. This way, even if you faint, you won't fall off. Brahm nodded. I'm honored. He wrapped his good arm around Saphira's neck and she took off in a flurry, springing high into the sky. Eragon backed away, buffeted by the eddies from her wings, and returned to the horses. He tied Snowfire behind Kadak, then left Yazuak, returning to the trail and following it southward. It was refreshingly cool under the trees, but Eragon did not let the soothing air lull him into a sense of security. He stopped briefly to fill the water skins and let the horses drink. Glancing down, he saw the Razak spoor. At least we're going in the right direction. Saphira circled overhead, keeping an eye on him. It disturbed him that they had only seen 2 Urgles. The villagers had been killed and Yazuak ransacked by a large horde, but where? Perhaps the one we encountered were a rear guard, or a trap. His thoughts turned to how he had killed the Urgles. An idea, a revelation slowly wormed its way into his mind. He, a farm boy of Palicum Valley, had used magic. Magic was the only word for what had happened. It seemed impossible, but he could not deny what he had seen. Somehow, I've become a sorcerer, or wizard, but he did not know how to use this new power again, or what its limits and danger might be. How can I have this ability? Was it common among riders? And if Brahm knew of it, why didn't he tell me? He shook his head in wonder and bewilderment. He conversed with Saphira to check on Brahm's condition and to share his thoughts. She was just as puzzled as he was about the magic. Saphira, can you find us a place to stay? I can't see very far down here. While she searched, he continued along the Nenora. The summons reached him just as the light was fading. Come. Saphira sent him an image of a secluded clearing in the trees by the river. Eragon turned the horses in the new direction and nudged into a trot. With Saphira's help, it was easy to find. But it was well hidden, so he doubted anyone else would notice. Are you sure you aren't hurt? Not on the outside. But I'm not sure about the rest of me. I should have been there sooner. Don't feel bad. We all made mistakes today. Mine was not staying closer to you. Her gratitude for that remark washed over him. He looked at Brahm. And how are you? The old man glanced at his arm. It's a large scratch and hurts terribly, but it should heal quickly enough. I need a fresh bandage. This one didn't last as long as I had hoped. They boiled water to wash Brahm's wound. Then Brahm tied a fresh rag to his arm and said, I must eat. And you look hungry as well. Let's have dinner first, then talk. When their bellies were full and warm, Brahm lit his pipe. Now, I think it's time for you to tell me what transpired while I was unconscious. I am most curious. His face reflected the flickering firelight, and his bushy eyebrows stuck out fiercely. Eragon nervously clasped his hands and told the story without embellishment. Brahm remained silent throughout it, his face inscrutable. For a long time, the only sound was the snapping fire. Brahm finally stirred. Have you used this power before? No. Do you know anything about it? A little. Brahm's face was thoughtful. It seems I owe you a debt for saving my life. I hope I can return that favor someday. You should be proud. Few escape unscathed from slaying their first Urgle, but the manner in which you did it was very dangerous. You could have destroyed yourself and the whole town. It wasn't as if I had a choice, said Eragon. The Urkels are almost upon me. If I had waited, they would have chopped me into pieces. Brom stamped his teeth vigorously on the pipe. You didn't have any idea what you were doing. Then tell me, challenged Eragon. I've been searching for answers to this mystery, but I can't make sense of it. What happened? How could I possibly use magic? No one has ever instructed me or taught me spells. Brom's eyes flashed. This isn't something you should be taught, much less use. Well, I have used it, and I may need to use it again. But I won't be able to if you don't help me. What's wrong? Is there some secret I'm not supposed to learn until I'm old and wise? Or maybe you don't know anything about magic. Boy, roared Brom. Oh, there's the Kratos. Boy. I messed it up. I had it better the first time. Boy, roared Brom. You demand answers with an insolence rarely seen. If you knew what you asked for, you would not be so quick to inquire. Do not try me. He paused, then relaxed into a kinder countenance. The knowledge you ask for is more complex than you understand. I feel as though I've been thrust into a world with strange rules that no one will explain. I understand, said Brom. It's late, and we should sleep. But I will tell you a few things for now, to stop your badgering. This magic, for it is magic, has rules like the rest of the world. If you break rules, the penalty is death. Without exception. Your deeds are limited by your strength, the words you know, and your imagination. What do you mean by words? Asked Eragon. More questions, cried Brom. For a moment I had hoped you were empty of them. But you were quite right in asking. When you shot the Urkels, didn't you say something? Yes, I did. Brizinger. The fire flared, and a shiver ran through Eragon. Something about that word made him feel alive. I thought so. Brizinger is from an ancient language that all living things used to speak. However, it was forgotten over time, and went unspoken for eons in Alagasia, until the elves brought it back overseas. They taught it to other races, who used it for making powerful things. But what does that have to do with magic? Interrupted Eragon. Everything. It is the basis for all power. The language describes the true nature of things, not the superficial aspects that everyone sees. For example, fire is called Brizinger. Not only is that a name for fire, it is the name for fire. If you're strong enough, you can use Brizinger to direct fire, to do whatever you will. And that is what happened today. Eragon thought about it for a moment. Why was the fire blue? How come it did exactly what I wanted, if all I said was fire? The color varies from person to person. It depends on who says the word. As to why the fire did what you wanted, that's a matter of practice. Most beginners have to spell out exactly what they want to happen. As they gain more experience, it isn't as necessary. A true master could say just water and create something totally unrelated, like a gemstone. You wouldn't be able to understand how he had done it, but the master would have seen the connection between water and the gem and would have used that as the focal point for his power. The practice is more of an art than anything else. What you did was extremely difficult. Saphira interrupted Eragon's thoughts. Brahm is a magician. That's how he was able to light the fire on the plains. He doesn't just know about magic, he can use it too. Eragon's eyes widened. You're right. Ask him about his power. But be careful of what you say. It is unwise to trifle with those who have such abilities. If he is a wizard or sorcerer, who knows what his motives might have been for settling into Carvajal. Eragon kept that in mind as he said carefully. Saphira and I just realized something. You can use this magic too, can't you? That's how you started the fire, the first day on the plain. Brahm inclined his head slightly. I am proficient to some degree. Then why don't you fight the Urkels with it? In fact, I can think of many times when it would have been useful. You could have shielded us from the storm, and kept the dirt out of our eyes. After refilling his pipe, Brom said, "Some simple reasons, really. I am not a rider. I wish that, even at your weakest moment, you were stronger than I. And I have outlived my youth. I'm not as strong as I used to be. Every time I reach for magic, it gets a little harder." Eragon dropped his eyes, abashed. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," said Brom, as he shifted his arm. "It happens to everyone." "Where did you learn to use magic?" "That is one fact I will keep to myself. Suffice to say, it was in a remote area from a very good teacher. I can at the very least pass on the lessons." "I knew that you would have more questions, and I will answer them, but they must wait until morning. Until then, I will say to discourage any experiments. Magic takes just as much energy as if you used your arms and back. That is why you felt tired after destroying the Urgles, and that is why I was angry. It is a dreadful risk on your part. If the magic had used more energy than what was in your body, it could have killed you. You should use magic only for tasks that can't be accomplished the mundane way." "How do you know if a spell will use all your energy?" asked Eragon, frightened. Brom raised his hands. "Most of the time, you don't. That's why magicians have to know their limit very well, and even then they should be cautious. Once you commit to a task and release the magic, you can't pull it back, even if it's going to kill you. I mean, this is a warning. Don't try anything until you've learned more. Now, enough of this for tonight." As they spread out their blankets, Saphira commented with satisfaction, "We are becoming more powerful, Eragon. Both of us. Soon no one will be able to stand in our way." "Yes, but which way shall we choose?" "Whichever we want," she said smugly, settling down for the night. Alright, I feel like that is a solid place for me to leave off. My throat's getting kind of hoarse. I feel a little sick today, unfortunately.